What's happening? What's happening? And again, good blues people, I say, what's happening? I always say that this is a very important episode. However, this episode is not only important and not only significant, this episode of the African American Folklorist of the month of March also is part of a special issue. So, the African American Folklorist of the month of March is central to that special issue that you will be getting soon. And we are honored to recognize Miss Jeannine Osayande, aka Mama Jeannine, as the African American Folklorist of the month of March. Mama Jeannine is a polycentric choreographer, educator, performer, and cultural expert whose life's work is grounded in the West African diaspora and African derived drum and dance traditions, oral history, and community folk life documentation. As the founder and director of Jeannine Osayande and Dunya Performing Arts Company, DunyaPAC, she has spent more than 4 decades using art as a vehicle for learning, healing, and social change, reaching hundreds of thousands of people locally, nationally, and internationally. Rooted in the historically black neighborhood of Swarthmore, Mama Jeannine's practice centers community voice, intergenerational memory, and place-based knowledge. Listen, y'all paying attention? This is folklore at its finest, okay? Through dance, storytelling, and ethnographic documentation, she uplifts the lived and lived experiences of Black communities, insisting that our histories be told by those who live them. That's key to our platform, which is why we always celebrate Miss Jeannine. Her work embodies African aesthetic principles such as polycentrism and polyrhythm, creating inclusive spaces where multiple voices, rhythms, and stories coexist and belong. At its core, Mama Jeannine's folklorist practice is about caretaking, the caretaking of elders, the caretaking of youth, the caretaking of tradition, and the caretaking of home place. Whether through performance, education, or oral history and ethnographic documentation, she reminds us that folklore is not something of the past, but a living practice that shapes how we know ourselves, how we care for one another, and how we imagine justice across generations. And it is with deep respect and gratitude that we celebrate Miss Jeannine Osayande, aka Mama Jeannine, as our African American folklorist of the month.
Oh,
Hey, Miss Jeannine,
hi.
how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you, Lamont?
I'm well. I'm well. And, I had the honor and pleasure to work with you in a producer and editor's capacity. So I got to watch you work, I got to work with you, and I got to hear not only the stories from the people and yourself of Swarthmore, but you were able to share with me the significance of the work without saying this is why it's significant.
Mhm.
I think that is what folkloristics are all about. And that's something that it can't necessarily be taught. You can learn the aesthetics of it, but it can't be taught. So I guess preference that, or I start that to ask this question. And this question is about the calling that you had some years ago, I believe at a Harvard Square.
For dance.
But that's where is that where it starts though?
Um, which calling?
Well,
Calling
the
to document?
yeah, I mean, as a folklorist, as a
Okay.
as an ethnographer, I'm wondering if that initial call to dance and art set off the trajectory.
I would almost say when I was younger, like in my family placement, I'm the youngest of three daughters. Um, and so with the cousins as well, I was in that young cousin group. And it was easy to move around in spaces where the adults would shoo you, like, get these kids out of the house or something, or out of this room. But I was right, when I have memories when I was like 5 or 6, kind of being able to start listening to stories, um, and them figuring that she's only 5 or 6. She's not paying attention to it. Plus, during that time as children, you couldn't always speak anyway. You were just quiet, like if you were in a room full of adults. Um, so I kind of start there, of just listening to the stories, of like my aunts and uncles, or my mom when she's with her friends, or my grandmother, when they're in the kitchen, cooking together, making pies or something, and just being the apple peeler. And so even the act of being the apple peeler and learning how to pare, the apple, with the knife, and try to do it where you don't cut the skin, like you have the long strip, all of those things. So maybe I would start even then. Um, yeah.
No. You don't have to. I love it because you started in a place that most people don't even recognize initially
Mhm,
that they're living a folk life folkloristic experience,
mhm.
right? So I guess my next question would be: at what point, or where, when, how did you realize those moments were significant to you documenting and preserving?
I would then go ahead and jump to Harvard Square when I was coming into um, learning about what is African diaspora drum and dance. There was once moment my mother actually went back to college when she was in her 20s, um, and just kept going and kept going from what they call junior college to then Penn State University. And it was at Penn State that I was in middle school, but they had at the college a dance group called the Mac J Dancers. And because I had older sisters who had friends who had older folks that were connected to the college, I was in the dance company, like in middle school with the college students. And so even in then, like in those moments, because we were learning about Black history, Black culture, this would have been in like 1973, 1974. Um, it just started opening up these ways to think about what's happening in the world that I didn't realize were, living in Swarthmore. Back to Harvard Square. So in Harvard Square, that there was a moment, I just moved to Cambridge, and this would have been in 1979. I got graduated out of high school in 79. So around that summer, towards the end of the summer, I had chased my love who lived in Massachusetts. So I had to live in Massachusetts, and that's what brought me there. At night, I would hear drumming, and not knowing what it is or what's happening, I just started walking into, would be about a half a mile from my apartment, into Harvard Square. And during that time, it was very common on all the different street corners throughout Harvard Square to have different artists performing. It was a like an art program. I don't even know the official name. I just know you could be under the coop, and you could be by the T, you could be by Oban Pond. There are all these locations where you could be. But I end up walking up to this group And it was a big circle, and there were drummers and dancers and everybody clapping and smiling, and it immediately grabbed me. Um, and maybe a month after that, a month and a half after that, because I go every weekend and stand there, one of the dancers pushed me into the circle. And when she pushed me in, she was from Philly. When she pushed me into the circle, it just dawned on me that I could do this with my life. Like I could
Mm,
actually, I don't know why, but the thought of it just came in me that you could be a dancer and you could do this even though you've never done this before. Um, then from there, those series of events,
right.
finding in Cambridge the Art of Black Dance and Music that happened to have an apprenticeship program maybe a year after being pushed in the circle. But I want to just close it and say this, like 40 years later, a Santawa, her name was Shawnee then, she and I were talking about that moment because she always credited herself with discovering Jeannine Osayande, the African dancer. And I thought it was God talking to me, right? Like in that moment, I was dancing and God spoke to me and said, "This is what you should do." So 40 years later, I find out Shawnee was one of the dancers, right? She was tired. She wanted to go out and get some water. And she just looked around the circle and saw me, moving and grooving. So she put her hands on my back, pushed me in the circle so that I could just go in and start dancing, and she could go get water and sit down and have a break. So my big moment of like God, and I mean, God was there because God's always there, but
Yes.
just that moment of, yes, this is what I do. Um, Also, with Shawnee serendipitous moment to get a break and sit down and get some water.
Right. I guess the irony of that is it's still a big moment, even if it seems like, oh, well, I just want to get water, right?
Right, right,
Because nothing happens by chance.
right, correct.
And, I think that's a perfect segue because from the beginning of your answering questions to this point, I wrote down these three words that I'm receiving:
Mhm,
oral, AURAL,
mm,
sensory, and memory.
mhm,
And it sounds like these three things function
mhm.
within your context and frequency, as an artist, as a folklorist, as a vessel of blackness, even.
Yeah.
Would you say that? And would you say that first of all?
I would agree. Even like the minute I was shoved in that circle, um, the music and even the breeze in the night sky that was happening, but mostly like the music, the rhythm, the community all playing together. People didn't even all know each other. We're all playing instruments together. But how it spoke to my body, like that embodied experience in that moment, I immediately, yeah, started was collecting information, even though I didn't know it, right? Like it was all happening, but I didn't realize until I realized I could make a commitment to this art form and I could actually train in it and study. But prior to that, it was all just this collection and of embodied experiences, um, that I, yeah.
Well, no, that's great because I'm going to jump around a bit, and one of the main reasons why I always jump around. So if you hear any other episode, I say this often, but
Mhm.
you said something just now that invoked something I wanted to ask later on,
Okay.
but I have to ask you now. The body, the bodily experience as an archive,
Right.
because that's what it sounds like you're describing. Could you talk to us about that?
Hmm. Yeah. It even like, for example, with my students, um I will tell them that when you're dancing, when we're in this space and we're together, of course, we're each physically here in this space. But when I see them and when they're moving, I see them moving stories from their beginnings of their
Mm,
birth, from their collective, like just experiences of where they grew up or what food they ate or what makes them laugh. That all of these things are showing up and how they're approaching movement and sharing movement and blending, movement with each other. Also ancestral energy. Not like I see ancestors in that kind of way have that gift, but I certainly feel them. I guess I do then. Because I feel them and I hear them. But even in that when we're moving our bodies, when I'm moving my body, when my students are moving their bodies, I also feel the presence of their ancestors in the space. And I know for me, I bring mine. So I don't just dance in the now. My body feels like it's from in the past, the present, and the future.
hmm.
Like
So,
all of it can be at different places and different degrees, but I feel that all three show up. Um, I had a teacher, Ibrahima Kamara, who's Senegalese teacher, and he would always say, and it would annoy me, and because I was in my 20s and I was young. Janina is what he called me. Janina, I'm not teaching you, I'm teaching your students. And this is after like you're on the floor and you're like putting it out and leaving nothing. And then he would keep telling me he's not teaching me, he's teaching my students. And I wasn't even teaching at that point. I was only a student. I wasn't even at a point where I'd started to teach. But of course, all these years later, again in that embodiment of just who we are in our life and the sacredness of it, right? That it every class that I teach for the last 40 plus years, I'm always thinking about what he told me. And so now, these students are my grandchildren's age that I'm teaching. I used to be close to their age. Now they're my grandkids' age, but it still stands that everyone coming in that space, all of us, the musicians that are there, the students, the everybody, that we're not just marking a dance step, not just on the harvest dance of Kakilambe from Guinea. I am bringing who I am to dancing that. But when I'm dancing it, I also am preserving and telling those African diaspora stories um, that are, steeped in the political movements of the civil rights, of the national dance company model, of the Africa, of Africa independence movements, right to vote movements. All of that was happening when African diaspora drum and dance was being formed as, a way to have that mouthpiece to, simply say Africa, first of all, is a continent, because people didn't, people would get confused with that back in the day. And now they still do sometimes. That blank is beautiful, right? But that all of these rich cultural traditions and experiences of who we are, um, we can't divorce it from, we can't just have it in our intellect and divorce it from our body or embodied ways of being and experiences.
right, which is what I was going to ask you about it being experiential, but you just answered that. So I guess what I would want, not I guess, what I would want to ask you, is there so how can I word this? A blueprint of, because you were taught, your teacher was taught, you're teaching. So are you teaching a particular traditional dance step, traditional dance idea, a physical, what is being passed on?
Okay. I think one of the most important things is just how we reflect on who we are and the power of who we are. and the power of who we are when we're with other individuals, and making community, reinforcing, and just creating and being together. But ask me the question again.
Well, so
Because I had it on my tongue, but then it did one of these.
it's okay.
I want to bring it back on.
What is being taught, right?
Okay, here it is. So it goes beyond movement, right? Like if somebody comes in and even they'll say, "Oh, she's the dancer," right? There's Jeannine, Mama Jeannine, or in the family, she's the dancer. But it's such a mouthful, right? Because we're not just teaching movement, we're teaching culture, we're teaching history, we're teaching philosophies, right? African foundations. We're teaching the Africanist aesthetic, which is, that is what we're looking at in the philosophies of like some of these commonalities of how we do the art, but how we connect the art to our way of being. You mentioned somewhere in there, a single bracelet does not jingle, like one of the quotes that I enjoy.
Yes.
But it is that idea of how are we together as a community, and the effort, right? Like, not that we just community, but we all know it takes effort, right?
Right.
To do that. So we're teaching that. We're teaching the effort of community. We're teaching risk taking, rigor, just learning like Black history, Black culture, which is connected to social change in terms of the politics of Black culture, the politics of Black people. What's interesting nowadays, because you have more like, 30 years ago when I was teaching at University of the Arts or at Swarthmore College or Sinus, we had international students, correct? But not on the level we're able to have them now. Um, that are, in colleges and universities. But when we're talking about things that are connected, like when in African dance and they're doing their readings, it's the first time they're really understanding even conversations about race or racism. In the United States, or the perspective of what that is from Black voices. And so their feedback is very eye-opening. Just that they are like, I'm just walking around in the world with no clue, and wouldn't have no clue about what this really means beyond movement on a dance floor for a PE or academic credit. But this is about life. So we teach life.
So let's stay there for a second. I'm going to give you a piece of a story, somewhat surface, and then I would like your input, because what you just said speaks to this. I have some colleagues, if you will, in New York that they have a blues dance community. And they were having an event, and I became good friends with the person. Her guitarist ran into challenging situations, so I was part of this event, but as a lecturer. But they asked me to come play behind her for her workshops. So I'm playing while they're dancing, and she kind of started explaining, what do you people, what are y'all really doing here? Because it doesn't seem like you're connecting, and you need to understand the why, so then you can figure out the movements. And as she explained that, a few of the Patreons were white, non-Black, and their response was, "Well, why do I have to know what happened to Black people to do this? We're just coming here to socialize." Now, I'm going to leave it there. And then my question to you, particularly because you said you guys are teaching life, and there's intentionality behind what you're doing. So it's a two-part question. One, have you ever faced those situations where the participants are like, why do we need to know this just to dance? And two, what is the significance which you did explain a little bit, but what's the significance of them understanding the experience of the people to be able to understand how to do?
It's almost, growing up in America, right? That you are already growing up with Black tradition and culture everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Even like, our car advertisements, all Black music, like you go to sports events, what's being played, just the music itself, right? The movements, right? Like the movements that have had an impact in the world, and the music is what? It's lots of people's culture, but when you look at who, right, and the entire world, when we think of jazz and we hit, of course, blue, like I'm putting blues. Am I allowed to put blues with jazz?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right. All right. But you're having hip hop, right? Or just that whole, all the connections to that whole industry and the whole culture of it is global. So first of all, where people are already growing up with the culture in ways that they just don't know that they are. In dance, they'll grow up in dance studios not knowing the history of tap and the history of like postmodern dance and modern dance having its roots to Black jazz music and improvisation. So it's there in the world. But if you're going to show up at an event and my thing is you're going to learn. And why? Because otherwise you're appropriating it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're just sitting there tapping your foot to the car commercial, or you're going down the thing and whatever, that's one thing. But if you're actually paying your money and showing up at a venue, but saying, and that's the thing. We want the culture, not the people, and the people's history, right? That is a thing in the US. That's very big. But I'm with the singer or that person who was the facilitator, that you're going to learn today. Right? You're going to learn today. And you can actually leave while I'm talking about it if you don't want to hear it. But you're going to learn today. Now, there could be other people where you can just tap, it's just entertainment, right? You can tap your feet and be entertained and go out the door. But when we get, we'll get hired with great, like stellar organizations, and we're hiring you, and they'll use the word for the entertainment, and we educate them. Like
Right.
people who are hiring us, even that, well, maybe we might not be the group if all you're looking for is entertainment, because that's not, exactly what's going to happen here. But it is about the education or it's appropriation. You're just taking it without any regard.
Right. Extracting. So,
Right.
so on your side of things, which is more important, right? Why for you it is imperative, it is significant to be a vessel of this information, this history, this story?
Well, I think about when you grow up, you go, if you end up going back to your community, not everyone does, but I did, right? Going back to the historically Black neighborhood of Swarthmore. I was sort of, when I went to Harvard Square, I was 10 years, in Massachusetts. Then I started having a family. And where do I want to live? Well, I want to live where I grew up and where my mama grew up and where my granddaddy grew up. And so that's where I came back to, raise the family and have all of us there. And so then the thought is, well, when you're coming back to your community, what do we bring to make it a better place? And that's where two things happened. One, Jeannine, Betty Ann's girl is that African dancer. Maybe she can dance at the schools. So my mom was a school teacher in the school district where at Nether Providence Elementary, in that town, like we lived outside of that, but the school district. And there was a committee, and back in the 90s, multiculturalism was the buzzword and the direction everybody was going. So they were always doing multicultural events. And we started getting, like, as soon as I came back to the area, getting hired. I didn't have a group at the time, right? It was just me. So it immediately allowed me to start meeting people in Philadelphia, artists that I to this day still work with and consider like family. Like we've, known each other for 30, 35 years at this point and worked together. But in doing that, I brought African drum and dance. Now, I grew up when we're talking about historically Black, that means, well, who was on the outsides of the neighborhood? It was a white, upper middle class Quaker community that, I'm growing up in. So I knew I could come home and not just go to the city and be able to do things with Black youth in the communities there, but white folks need to learn about Black history and Black culture just like everyone else. Also, how Art of Black Dance and Music trained us in their, I wasn't inventing a lot of new things. I'm going from what our teachers are teaching us. And it wasn't just Art of Black Dance and Music. I just want to say, throughout the entire United States, you had different models of African drum and dance groups coming up in the late 60s, but definitely the 70s, the 80s, and even coming into the 90s, still existing now. And so there is a mandate to go out and teach Black culture because Black is beautiful. And we need folks to know, like, when we say that, what do we mean? And so we're going deeper than like here, but going all the way into the people and the culture and the change makers that we are. So when we're showing up to dance, when we're teaching our dance, we now are using the dance and the music as a mechanism for that social change to happen. But for me, I'm like, well, my community can certainly benefit because these students are going to go to these colleges, Ivy League schools, or sometimes private schools. They're going to get out. They're going to be decision makers. And I love the idea that this population of students at Swarthmore Rutledge Elementary School, Germantown Academy, and where's my other school? Westtown School, and through young audiences, that they're going to actually grow up and say, I had this solid Black experience where I didn't just we don't just teach them to dance. I'm telling you, they are dancing. Right. And we're using professional drummers. So when they play, when we get to the performance level, those students are flying in the air across the stage, just like the college. These are third graders, like the college students fly across the air, like the community, because it's there for everybody. And it's there for everybody in what level you can accept it on or what level you can access it on, just based on even what your body can do. So it was mandated. Get out there, coming from, the Black Power movement, coming from when they started having these national dance company models, like in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah, getting and using art to facilitate social change. Leopold Singer in Senegal, like my teachers were from Senegal. Same thing, using the movements, started Negritude movement and then moved on, but using these different movements to use the art for social change in the community. But also for me, I use they gotta learn too.
Right. Well, no, I mean, and this is perfect because now we can talk about Homeplace,
Yes.
Memory, the project, right? And the Quakers, because they're the Quakers' story is very much so intersected with Black Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Right. So let's start with your family, your historically Black community in Swarthmore.
Mm-hmm.
And the 7 generations strong, I think.
Yep. 7 generations strong.
Talk to us about it. And yes, And while you're talking to us about it, share what inspired you to do this when you said that.
Okay. Well, of course, strong could be interpreted in many different ways, but just in movement, you know, Rosie the Riveter. Um, I have an image of where I'm telling of a oral history story, like a personal story, childhood story called the birthday party story, and there's a map behind me of my neighborhood, and so when I'm was telling that story, I liked that image of like the arms up, the muscles up. So yeah. So I think,
Yes.
you can have boop boop for the brain. All right. So first of all, the thing about it is what had happened was we grow up, all of us, wherever we're going to grow up, and it is what it is because it's what you know, especially
Right.
as a child, right? This is the environment, this is the community. And when you're coming up in the 60s and 70s, the world is smaller because, you know, how we communicate technology was going to be different. So, you know, nowadays, man, you know, we can all talk to people. It's just crazy, you know, wherever and whenever.
Right.
So, going back in those days, it's very insular community. Um, it's the only thing I knew. It's what you knew. It's the town you grew up in. But you knew things like when we're all walking to school, we're walking out of a neighborhood that's Black, and our friends are coming from other neighborhoods. There could be a few at that point, um, um, Black folks who were living outside of the neighborhood. There were like 3 families, but everybody else is white, couple Asian families, our Jewish brothers and sisters, right? So I knew just physically where in growing up that I was in a dynamic place, but I thought it was like that everywhere.
Hmm.
So it wasn't until I'm even in school and that I could name for 3 blocks around everybody in every house and their pet. And
Wow.
I'm like in 4th grade, right? But I know everybody in every household, every pet in every household, 3 blocks around me. And I noticed like my classmates knew who might live on either side of them or who might live across the street or who, because it may be their children, but they didn't know everybody in their block. They didn't know the people in the yard behind them or the other yards. And that to me always, you know, was like, really, that's peculiar. Why wouldn't you know everyone? But it didn't dawn on me, you know, that I was in a historically Black neighborhood. I knew I was in a post-segregated neighborhood, um, but you know, not that. So during for my family and for my neighborhood, the historically Black neighborhood of Swarthmore, uh, the Black folks themselves came to Swarthmore around 1890, and they were migrating, coming, you know, during the time of coming towards the end of the Great Migration, and we had folks specifically from 3 areas: from Maryland, from Delaware, and from Virginia. So that was the other thing in the neighborhood, that you had intergenerational families, all knowing each other, and again coming from these 3 areas plus additional areas as well, right? um we're, you know, south, or we're just north, I should say, of the Mason-Dixon line, right? Not that far away. Um, and so when folks were coming in, for example, for my family, there was a business and family called the Leap Year family. The Leap Year family actually are credited with the first railroad system in the United States, but
Whoa.
they also had a rock quarry, and they had some other businesses. My great uncles and then eventually my grandmother and her sisters migrated and actually lived on a property on the Leap Year estate right off of a creek called Crum Creek in, I guess that area is Wallingford. Um, then they eventually moved from that dwelling. Like folks would keep coming in, and you'd come in and stay, you know, in the homes. Then they eventually moved into the town of Swarthmore. Um, But Swarthmore, the borough of Swarthmore was established in 1896. So what you're seeing is during that migration, when that area would have been considered a different area called Springfield, the African Americans were already living in the neighborhoods and living in Swarthmore before it became Swarthmore. Um, my grandmother, or I should go to great grandmother Martha Tillman, is one of the folks who migrated. In her case, I know she was from Virginia, but she was coming by way of New York with her small son that turned out to be John Coleman, who's my grandfather. um, Martha Tillman ends up migrating, and people are coming like to our area because you had the Navy shipyard there, you had in Chester the refineries that were there, you had Swarthmore College. Um, so you're working there, but you also have, which she came as what they in the 19 early, I think it was 1910 census. I'm not sure which year, I might be off on my year. She's listed as a servant in a family in Swarthmore that was her age. Like she was 32, they were 32,
Whoa.
2 children. And so, you know, in those days, the woman would live at the house and be the servant in the house,
Right.
and her children would live somewhere else. So my grandfather wasn't able to live with his mother growing up. He lived in town in the black neighborhood, in the then segregated neighborhood, with one of his aunts and like an uncle and another great aunt. And then on the weekends when your mom, like on Sunday, you'd be able to see each other. So on my grandfather's side, it's coming through Martha Tillman. On my grandmother's side, Elizabeth Coleman, those are the folks who were connected to the Leap Year estate and the Leap Year property, and them coming in. They're coming from Delaware, so they have things like, in Delaware, when folks were coming through Reconstruction, you had smaller farms. So blacks were you had more black people free a little bit sooner.
That
And
was
so
my question. Okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
in some of those areas. So when I was like doing census and just trying to figure out and find people and who's who and this and that, I kept seeing that they could read and write. It was like, wait a minute. They could read and write. They could read and write. They could, and even the other neighbors in the vicinity and counties could not read and write. But it was like all these black people could read and write in Delaware.
I,
Go
I,
ahead.
I really don't want to stop this beautiful story,
Yes.
but you raised such a significant point. Outside of your surprise and shock, what did that do for you as a person, as a being, as a researcher, to find out your connection to free blacks who were literate?
It changed the narrative
Mm-hmm.
completely. Like I ended up buying another book, like a book. So I was like, what is this thing? What are they saying? It's not even like, but what, okay, it answered the questions. Like when people would always say, this is the first generation of blacks graduating at a college or getting a high school degree. But my great aunts and uncles, actually, like my aunt, who my first name is Rachel, who I'm named after, was in the first graduating class of Delaware State.
Wow.
And so with a chemistry degree.
Wow.
So we always knew in our family that there were folks who, like even in her, generation coming out of the 1930s and having that, and her sister as well, and them actually going back to Delaware State to be deans there, and work there, all the way into retirement, have a building named after them. Right. Like, so, but it made the connection to some of the questions. And just like for Aunt Rachel, their mother, all of their mother died when they were babies, like little, from whatever fever was happening in the early 1900s. What's been yellow? yellow fever,
I think so.
scarlet
Scarlet fever.
scarlet fever. So their mom died when they were like under 10 years old, like 7 kids or something, all under 10 years old. And they just were like, we don't, the granddad was their father was a farmer. So it was like, just send them to school, because then they could at least be somewhere during the day. And that's like, they immediately went into these systems, but it just changed. So the answer to the question is, it just had me rethink, who am I? And realizing that the literacy went back a lot further than I realized.
Wow.
Um, um, Also, with the family ending up in Swarthmore, although Swarthmore, I shouldn't say although when you talk about segregation, strike it, put a boom. In addition to
I like that.
segregation from like K to, I think it was 5th or 6th grade in the Swarthmore school district. It would have been just Swarthmore back then. When they got to high school, then students were flushed into the general population. So it was integrated at that point. But it being us living in Swarthmore, a town like Swarthmore, with a Swarthmore college there, and with parents where a lot of the kids' parents were professors or these professional people, for the Blacks growing up in Swarthmore, even in our previous generations, although we had people who were like my great grandmother, servants or carriage drivers or things like that, you also had Mr. Herndon, who was the athletic trainer at Swarthmore College, going back in the 1940s. You had Mrs. Santos, who was one of like 40 students getting a master's degree from University of Penn. So you're having these other models like in the neighborhood where in our community as well, is just really pushing education because of the, I think, community that we were in. And other neighborhoods, I would say, in other school districts in our area were similar, where you had historically Black neighborhoods, where we're like in Nether Providence, you have South Media has a neighborhood there. And so those students would have gone to that particular school.
Wow. So, because it's such a loaded answer, I have so many questions, but I'm going to bring it back to our honoree. So, doing this research, right, and looking up all this, I don't know if you ever said what it was that sparked the fire is for you to do this.
Yes. All right. It was when I came into like my 40s, I started noticing that things that happened to me in my life when I was younger, were doing like a figure 8. And it was starting to intersect in the middle. Like all of a sudden, something that I had happened that I forgot about. Then another incident happens, and then it all comes back, and I'm like, wait a minute, is this what happens? When you get a little older, that these experiences start to loop back. And so as a dancer, and touching back on what you were saying just about our bodies holding memory, for me, I like using, dance to tell stories or to work through different thoughts or ideas. And so I had a couple of situations, and one of them was seeing this lady, like a mom of a friend of mine when I was little, where all my friends got invited to a birthday party, and I didn't. But I didn't get an invitation, but I wanted to go there because first, I like cake, I like fun, and I didn't feel like I should have been left out. But we were growing up in a time where maybe, in plenty of families, I could go in my friends' houses, but it still was a time when other families, they wouldn't want somebody Black in their house, right? That was the time that it was. So that's what I figured was happening because she was my best friend at school. Anyway, I end up crashing the party, telling my mom I'm invited, crashing this party, having the whole experience, but feeling a little embarrassed that I did it. And so I forgot about it and put it out of my head. And then coming back to embodied experience is like 25 years later, I'm visiting my father in a nursing home. And excuse me, I get to the end of the hallway with my son, and I see this lady sitting in a wheelchair across from my father's room. And I couldn't believe it. It was my best friend's mother.
Wow.
And so I come down the hall, and then my heart, like I start having I don't know, an anxiety attack. My heart starts beating. My mouth is watery. I start sweating my armpits. And I remember the birthday party story. I
Oh,
remember that I showed up with my gift, dressed in my outfit, and showed up at her door and rang that doorbell. And she let me in, right? Because other Black people have birthday party stories where they did not get in. But
wow.
yeah, mine is I got in. Anyway, this surreal moment happened of something that happened as a little girl that now I'm this like mom and mature lady, or not, older lady now. And I thought the story was over and I had put it to rest, and now it came back. So the mom and I actually were able to talk about it. And instantly, going back to the embodiment, is I turned it into a performing arts piece
Huh.
called The Birthday Party Story. I have actually performed it over the last like 20 years in different
Wow.
ways, in different forms. Um, it has, sometimes it can have movement with it where I'm doing the movement while I'm telling the story, or I've told it and had someone else dance me, like being me, a little Jeannine, dancing me as the story is being told. Um, Darn it. So what does that, now I'm trying to like bring all of my things back to it. Um, just having like living where I live. When I started to do stories like that, I one day went to see Deborah Kodish, who was founder and was the executive director of the Philadelphia Folklore Project. Deborah knew me through African drum and dance, not through any kind of oral history or doing these things. But when that happened, I documented that story into a dance. I started thinking about my great grandmother, Martha Tillman, and wanting to like just tell some stories about who she was, because who she was is who I am. Um, realizing the street we used to skip down to go to the fire station when we were kids, that on that same street, there's a house. And in that house is where my great grandmother was the servant. So all these things like were coming out, and I got to tell it as a story. Then I was also my father's caregiver. He was first Black patrolman in Swarthmore, Donald,
Wow.
and also Black police chief in Swarthmore. So I was a caregiver for him. He had a neurological illness.
His name was Donald what?
Donald Lee,
Okay.
Donald Harrison Lee.
Oh,
He's amazing, was amazing man. So I wanted to tell his story too, right? So what had happened is I thought, well, I should do a performance piece in 3 parts. Something I'd never really done in this kind of way. Usually everybody knew me actually in dance, but not in doing, or telling folk tales, but not in doing an embodied oral history performance. So I had 3 stories: the birthday party story, which is mine, my great grandmother's story, which is all of ours, because her story kind of is why we ended up in Swarthmore. And it had to do with someone she married who actually had a tragic accident,
oh
and the
no.
money she got from the accident gave us roots in our town. So there's this whole like story with that, like how something bad happened, but it turned around and it like changed our families. It lifted us up. Even though my mom and them were like the poorest people in the town, they had the land they lived on, and that ended up being valuable and precious.
Wow.
So there's that. And then this other story, right? Then my third story with my dad. So I do my little thing in my town at a place called the Creative Living Room, where they were helping me to even do this. And they knew it wasn't something I'd ever tried to do. I'd say I did okay, but the stories were compelling and really strong. So they encouraged me to do it again. And then I sort of took only one story and now I use that. I showed it to Deborah Kodish and like, oh, let me show you this thing I'm doing because my life is getting infinity full circle things. And I hit play. I pulled up my laptop, and Deborah started looking at it and being the folklorist that she is. And then I'm telling her about, in my neighborhood on Sundays, you don't hang up clothing on the line. We have a custom, porch parties in the beginning of the spontaneous porch parties, the beginning of spring. So just here are the things about where I grew up, right? Back to earlier, I said, it's where you grew up. So it's what you knew. It was what I knew. But Deborah's jaw dropped. And she just kept listening and then asking, because I love you folklorists and your questions. Ever. Plus, you have a way of like seeing people, right? Folklorists see people and validate them by your just listening, right? So I felt so like validated, and like that my everyday life and these things that we do culturally, like in our, like at the Black church or in the neighborhood, or these stories, that they actually mean something besides that I lived them, right? Um, and so Deborah's like, oh, you got to apply for this program that we're doing at the Folklore Project. This had to probably been in 2000, I don't know, 6, around then, or 2006, 2007. And it was to do folk life research, to get trained with a cohort of people who had very totally different stories, backgrounds, reasons to come together, which that was incredible in itself, right? To be with a collection of folks that you wouldn't otherwise be in a room with and working together, like, you know, just totally, different walks of life, different experiences, growing up in different places. And here we were all together. And so we got the most superb training, like from that experience. And that is what, guess, yeah, 2007-ish and 2008. That is for me what got me learning how to really document our family, not just ear hustle as a little girl, not just walk around with it actually in my body, but also even in thinking about someone who does African diaspora drum and dance. Like I got my stories. They're not all like the harvest dance at a farm, because I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in this neighborhood. And so by being able to learn how to study my community and learn about my community and our traditions, it helped for me to be more solid in how I tell my stories when I do African dance, right?
Right.
That I actually bring those stories into it, right? So that I'm not just doing the reenactment of this dance, which there's a place and a purpose for it. But I'm going to talk about Amadou Diallo and why those policemen shot him in New York. I'm going to, talk about, ask you to write your last will and testament, because I'm thinking about the Great Migration in my family. And so now I'm getting students like, let's go in this way, let's go in that way. I'll pause, take water.
Yes, go ahead, because what everything you said leads to so many things I have documented down here to discuss with you. One of them is oral history as living practice, which pretty much what you just not pretty much, that is what you just articulated. I would like to piggyback off something you just said before we move forward. The ear hustling as a little girl,
Mm-hmm.
to the body being a source of archival memory,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I guess I would like to know what your thought was when you realized these two things live together simultaneously, that they're not separated. And is that more
Validation.
of a, say that
Yeah,
again?
validation
Mm, mm.
of the various ways that we can express ourselves, that we can do our research, that our body can also be a valid palette, or for to do the work, to tell the stories, to have the experiences. um yeah, and that there are multiple ways that this can happen. um and that it just made sense to me, like it always made sense to me, but I didn't always feel validated by it.
So I wanted to ask you about folk belief, because you spoke about infinity circle and full circle and things. But before we go there, if I can remember, I do have to stay here on the idea of validation, not validation from others, but validation of self, knowing you've been doing something, but
Mhm,
then taking the steps to learn what it was you were doing, to have the language for it.
mhm.
How important was that in your journey?
That helped me, and a lot of my, like, in African dance teachers, French and their traditional languages, Wolof or Bamana, were their first languages. So when we were studying with our teachers, um, we always kept journal, like I did anyway, books, just to be able to communicate and to be able to be understood. So having the language helps to be understood, not taken for granted. Um, Having the language helps to go deeper, um, in just the discovery of what the work is. Um, um, yeah, and to be able to teach it, like to be able to transfer it, to have ways that I can transfer it, or think about how do I transfer it. Even in the language, for example, in movement, um, because I do a lot of, teach on a collegiate level, but my company, Dunya Performing Arts Company, does K-12 programming. So when we go into a room and we're working with third graders, and you have 6 1-hour sessions to work with them, with that sixth one being a dress rehearsal, and then the seventh time you're with them, they're in a performance. Um, you only have out, besides the supplemental information that you're doing with the teachers, that's going to happen when I'm in that space. You have an hour, and so everything you say and everything you do, from the minute, like, I walk in the door, and when they walk in, right, how they walk in, you like all the different ways, like you're speaking, you're saying something, it's happening. So learning, having the language, being able to pass it on, even helps in how concise you are, in how you deliver it, how I'm teaching it, to just to be able to share it and know this is it, and they're out.
Let me ask you this real quick. I don't think I asked you, even though I wanted to go further with something. I have it written down here. But before I forget, Mama Jeannine, how did that moniker?
How did I get Mama Jeannine?
Yes.
I got old, man. First, I was Jeannine Lee. That's the maiden name, right? And so as a dancer, Jeannine Lee, Jeannine Lee, Jeannine Lee. Then I got married, Jeannine Osayande. So then I, took on, so Jeannine Osayande, Jeannine Osayande. Then I'm around the end of my 20s, early 30s, maybe 30, like 32. I'm teaching at U Arts, and they start calling me Miss Jeannine. So I went from being just to be, the artist or be Jeannine and like Jeannine. Suddenly there's Miss Jeannine. The college students start calling me Miss Jeannine, the security guards. So that became my handle, right? So it's Miss Jeannine, Miss Jeannine, Miss Jeannine. And then like 3 years ago at Swarthmore College, some of the students start calling me Mama Jeannine, because our drummers go by Baba. These are, terms of endearment, terms of respect, to have the Miss, like in the African American community, be Mr. Joe, Mr. who? Mr. Roscoe
Yes.
and Miss Polly, right? So you're using someone's first name, but putting that title in front. But I come into my like 60s and all of a sudden the drummers are Baba this and that. So the students like, well, then you're Mama Jeannine. I'm like, no, because it does mean you really like in your elderhood, you're coming up to your next level, which I'm glad, I'm glad to be alive. Shoot. So I'll take it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but I'll admit if they could still just call me Miss Jeannine, which in K to 12 programming they do, but collegiately they've crowned me with Mama Jeannine. So
That's a humongous honor, though.
yeah, it is. So instead of, Professor Osayande or Professor Jeannine, it's Mama Jeannine. But it does give the respect because the people who were ahead of me who had that title are huge. Who like, Mama Kariyama, who's like from a Philadelphia area dance scholar that like have that. But so yeah. At work one day, one of the costume designers in theater was like, "So, I heard you're Mama Jeannine now. How did that happen?" I earned the title, I suppose. That the students gave it to me, so I earned it.
That's how it works. So now you mentioned the term Baba. So and then you mentioned infinity. So that sounds like hoodoo. That sounds like Yoruba. That sound. How much is the dance, the drumming, and the entire event slash ritual? And you earlier mentioned how this is sacred, right? And there's a lot of wow connections between I would say Black Southern Christianity to Hoodoo to Yoruba. Excuse me. How much of all of these things are incorporated in what you're doing?
So for my practice, I actually don't do Yoruba dance traditions, although for Haitian dance traditions, we do Yambalu. Is it like in the diaspora traditions would be the one that I'd probably say for like bringing in religion. But when I teach it, I I'm teaching the religion for them to understand the history of the dance, to understand the people and the power of it. But I don't teach it as a religious course in that way, or when we're doing the dance in that way, because I'm not an expert to go all the way in. But the elements that we're teaching are for the students to make sure they have the full body knowledge and respect, so that as I'm doing these dances, I'm doing these movements, I'm understanding, the people, the culture, and the significance of the religion. I've had um, I've had students who were heavy Christian folks, who, when I announced we're going to do Yambalu, and I kind of try to do it where I don't bring in voodoo or even say the word in the beginning. I'm sorry, I was getting over a cold, but uh, I've had them pull me aside and say, I don't know if I can do this. Because I don't know why people talking about something's against their religion. Because no, I'm not asking you to practice. I'm just asking you to learn. Like, you don't even know what it is. But I've had a few times had students where we would actually do an information, like if I'm teaching Jambalu, we do an information session for them to really be able to talk about this and address whatever concerns. And we connect it to, damn it, colonization. When it comes to their marketing and how their campaign was, oh, they were on fire with that. Because when anybody hears voodoo, it's immediately like something horrible or something bad or something negative or against my something, when you don't even know what it is, right?
Right.
People don't even know what it is.
Right.
So yeah, I had a student who, well, I don't want to shout out people's religions,
Right. Right.
who wouldn't even be in the room while we would dance or learn it, even though it was on the syllabus. When we got to that part 3, like dances in the semester, they acted like they didn't know. And I'm like, we went over this. It's in the syllabus. You should have dropped the class.
Yes.
Like, honestly, so, but you had to go through a whole lot, with the dean, with everybody to figure out what to do. And I had to write a paper, like, you're saying it's against your religion, but I doubt you know what this is. So you're going to write from your religious perspective, what is it?
Right.
So I just do the research. And yeah. Sacred in terms of other ways that I'm using that word. Because these dance forms were showing up at the Black political rallies, right? In Philly, Church of the Advocate, was one of the main places there. And for me, when we were in Boston, even in it being in Harvard Square, right? That not being necessarily a sacred space, well, it could be, right? But it got claimed as one and as being like a spot where this form happened. And when it was happening and being created, it was happening right here on this ground in this location. So just folks looking at it through that lens of it being sacred to the Black people, to the politics, to the culture.
So let me ask you this question. First of all, great definition and breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
What does home space mean to you?
What does home space mean? It's something that's yours with roots, that is shared and is temporary.
Wow. So temporal meaning what?
For example, my mom's house, her house and my uncle's house sat on our family land. I kind of mentioned the land a little earlier, on the family land with the Tillmans and Colemans. And it had been in our family with my grandchildren being alive at that point for 7 generations, right? And we had to make a decision. My mom owned, after she passed away, 5 homes in Swarthmore. Count it, 5, which is amazing. Like, who knows somebody that's a school teacher that owned 5 properties in any town?
Right.
But she was committed for the neighborhood as long as she could, for this realtor named Pastuzik, the dad, to not buy all the Black houses in Swarthmore. And so my mom started built a house, bought this one, and just like ended up with, at one point, 4.5 to 5 houses.
Wow.
So then we got to, though, after she passed, and the estate, this and that, it basically had to come to the decision of selling the home on the family land. Like, there are different properties. Which do we keep? Which do we let go? And even though we're making a home place and our blood, sweat, and tears are in this land, and our history is anchored in who I am, and then when you meet me the first, and you see what I typed in there, Jeannine Osayande, historically Black neighborhood, Swarthmore, you're going to know it, right? Every year, everybody knows it. When I'm on campus, you know it. Everybody knows where I'm from. But as a human being, we have a short existence on this world, right?
Right.
My life expectancy as an African American woman is what, 80, 85. So I'm 20 years from, to keep on living, or maybe who knows what. And so that's what I mean, that we can be in a space and it feels like forever, but it wasn't ours before we got here, and it's not going to be ours when we leave. And that's sort of the attitude when we just start to realize we have to let go of the property.
Mm-hmm.
That the native indigenous folks in our area, in Pennsylvania, where the Lenape, it was their land before before it was our family land. And it's going to keep cycling in whose land it's going to be, in whose space it is. So yeah, so
Okay.
making a home place where it exists forever is in the generational memory and in the embodied experience, but where it's temporal is just in my time here.
Got
But
it.
I want people to know, for 200 years after because of who I am, it's just in me that 200 years from now, they're going to know who the Black people are that lived in Swarthmore. And that's where oral history and folklore have really been that mechanism for me, for my family. I also want to shout out, Deborah Kodish was there to help, but my mama was also encouraging for me to gather stories and start being the next generation, because she also was good at gathering stories herself. Why? Because an elder above her and two different neighbors told her to do it. One, by saving obituaries. So we have boxes of, we save obituaries. Sometimes I just sit and read them because I think it's amazing. And then the other was that they were realizing that all the newspapers keep telling our stories, but we got to tell our story.
Okay, so let's right there, putting the story in the proper context, right? So let's talk about the project that we worked on, that you started and are continuing to work on as you document and collect Swarthmore, please.
So there are different versions of how I started to be how I was learning to gather these stories and oral history. And so first it started, I'll say officially and formally, with the Philadelphia Folklore Project. I love them forever for that. And just the work that they do and continue to do, and all you folklorists in the world. Then they got us in touch with Scribe Video, us meaning the first thing was me learning how to document people in my neighborhood. After I did that, Scribe Video had a project, and still it continues, called Precious Places. Precious Places, this would have been in 2011, had a call for folks, communities to apply. And I decided to talk to the folks in the neighborhood and we would apply. What it allowed us to do through a video format with Deborah, with the Folklore Project, we did it, record it with slides, with slide visuals, and an audio recording. With this project, Precious Places, we were able to do the whole video in the neighborhood. It was intergenerational in terms of the team. For example, my aunt Doris was the director. My uncle was the cameraman. He was like in his 80s, and he's the cameraman. My grandchildren, as well, my nieces, so just different, other neighborhood people, all of these different folks. So now I feel like I'm losing where I'm going. Where am I going? I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're discussing the projects.
Right, different projects. So yes, so Scribe Video, Precious Places, that was amazing, because we got some stories from people that soon after wouldn't have even been able to tell the stories.
Wow.
What it is it was the way it was positioned, the way Deborah did it, the way Scribe Video is, they empower the community. They trained us. We would go into with both organizations, but I'll just talk about Precious Places now. They trained us to go into the communities and how to ask the questions and what to look for even when you walk in like somebody's house. How do you look over a mantle to like certain things to notice where those things that are important to individuals that, you know, in homes that, you know, sometimes this is here, sometimes that is there. So just learning the humanities as humanities 101. Then the technical aspect of it, of how to work the cameras, how to, you know, also how to do the editing. We did in our process have someone, you know, who's helping from the organization all along that works with us. But it was amazing, like, you know, learning how to do logs of every single photo that ever is going to be in what you're doing, learning how to do logs of everything everybody said, you know, the transcripts, and then
Yes.
take the transcripts and have a transcript summary, have the video summary, have, you know, what, you know, material culture and all the items, like how to catalog and learn to do all of that was mind blowing and just incredible of the care, right? That it would take. And all of this because we are starting to tell our own stories.
Right.
With our own voice, right? Asking our own questions, deciding what our table of contents is going to be, um, us deciding who all is, you know, who's going to be part of it in different rounds of it, trying to capture different like different families, for example, so that like I know I can get all my people on board, but I need to hear from the Johnsons. We need to hear from the Jones family, the Adams family, like you know, all of these other folks, not just Coleman and Warren. How incredible it was, like in the eyes of the elders, when I first started with the Folklore Project, getting those stories, like learning about rent parties from Miss Kitty, who I would have never, like, you know, I'd always see Miss Kitty, but never sat down to know these like migration stories, you know, about her family, um, and how they would look at me, um, because I want to be able to get our stories and document our stories, and that we matter. And that at the end of the day is what it was, that in a place where your voice was marginalized, where folks don't even know how to describe you, they'll call you the heartbeat of the African American community instead of just saying it was a segregated neighborhood, right? Like ways, and so things like how people are describing us are like, no, they're not going to keep describing us in ways that don't describe us the way we want to say who we are. And so all of these things, like with them, with Folklore Project, Scribe Video to do the Precious Places video, and that got shown at like the Kimmel Center in Philadelphia at an
Wow.
international film festival with a collection with our cohort, which was amazing. Like suddenly we're in vans with these elders from the neighborhood who never thought that they would sit there and have this huge projection and all these people come to hear their stories and how their stories fit alongside other communities and their stories too, that
Right.
they like all of this matters. And it just keeps going back to that we are telling our own stories with our own voices. I know I would use like the word ethnography when I would be describing what I'm doing, but I don't know what out like it's me on the inside. So is there a word for that, like ethnography with me on the inside, not just observing everybody, but being in it?
Yeah. So there's participatory uh,
Research.
observation, but
I'm so-
you are, I think it's called edict when you're inside.
oh, let me write that. What's it called?
I think it's edict. There's edict and emic, or I forget. But one of them is when you're of the folk group doing the work.
Eat it and
I think it's edict, and I always get these words. I forget them because I like you. I'm part of the community, but
right, right.
but I think
That's
it's edict. I think it's edict. I think
okay.
I'll follow up on that for you. And folks listening, particularly folklorists that are very serious about the aesthetics and definitions and terminologies, don't shoot the messenger. Just put the proper terminology in the bottom in the chat, okay?
What he said.
Right.
Yeah.
What?
So, and I would even say, like, when I started, of course, like when I'm dancing my stories and when I'm telling them in oral, folklore, oral history formats, all of that, the birthday party story, things like that, I'm telling them. But when I'm doing the work, I tend to not have people asking me the questions, but I am always wanting to be behind the camera or behind the notepad and having like propping other folks up for them to do the work and learn how to do the work. So facilitating it to help to
Right.
facilitate it. Yeah.
Okay. So first, it comes out of anthropology, and it's edic, ETIC, and emic, EMIC, and it comes out
Okay.
of anthropology. Okay, so now, okay, so as a facilitator, because when it comes to public facing work, which what we call public folklorists, what we do, or applied folklorists is the term I like more.
Mhm.
And if you were to ask me, what, how would I categorize your work in which I would say an applied folklorist,
Hey,
right?
wait, let me ask you something.
Yes, ma'am.
How would you describe my work and what I do?
I would describe your work and what you do as an applied folklorist who participates in public practices, public facing practices.
Okay.
Applied meaning your research and ethnography is utilized for the upliftment and highlighting of your community and folk group,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
It's applicable to your peoples.
Mhm.
That's why I would say, and that's why I just love working with you, right? Public facing, public meaning if not the end result, the purpose is usually some sort of public event or performance
Mhm.
that again is to engage or engage with the community,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And so now that's just me. What I would ask you though, do you consider yourself a folklorist? And at what point did you begin to consider yourself a folklorist, if you do?
Oh boy. I think I got caught up, like, well, I didn't go to school and get a degree that says I'm a folklorist. So I never wanted to say that I was a folklorist. Even years ago, there was somebody who got upset because I even thought maybe I could be and had it in like a bio. And they're like, "You're not a folklorist," and this whole thing in the 90s. So I think I eventually quietly pulled it out of who I was. um would I consider myself a folklorist? I always say, like, I'm an oral historian. Is
Okay,
that a leg of being a folklorist? I know.
absolutely. Because that's oral history is part of the work.
Right.
Absolutely.
But all right, I'm gonna claim it.
Claim it. That's
I'm
right.
I am a folklorist. I consider myself a folklorist.
I
The
love
work
it.
that I do is important to my community, and I feel that using folklore, it was the perfect like tool for my people.
I'm so happy I have that feature right now because there's so many times, and that's necessary. So now let me ask you, and you made it very clear that the work you do, uh, though it's for our people, it is also for everyone else, educational wise, for them to understand, right?
Correct.
Talk to us about that.
Just like I feel for Black History Month that it's it's every day, right? The 365, that I also feel that Black history itself is for everybody, right? That all of us could learn about everybody, like everybody's histories, but definitely in the US, if you're living here or if you're born here, um, it's just paramount to be able, like if we're talking about social change, to actually take the time to know, um, to really know people, and the best way to do it is hear them in their own voices. I want to throw in and add, outside of the scribe video, as you know, the project we worked on was the podcast series. The podcast series, originally it was me just again wanting to get back in it. I hadn't collected, sat down with the community and done any work for many, many years. I did like small, just recording things, but not with any type of project in mind, and got a grant through the Ann Bernstein Rich Hand Peace Action Fund, which is connected to the Quakers Friends in Swarthmore. Anyway, that allowed me to do the series of interviews, going in the neighborhood. And we actually did it during COVID. We did it outside on Brighton Avenue, which is the street that I live on. And I believe we had a series of 3 to 4 different days that we got together as a community to do our oral history circles. After that, I didn't have, like, I had the content, but I didn't have the money for us to take it to the podcast level. And that's where, coming back again to the Folklore project, the ED at the time, Naomi, yay, Naomi, did some research and wrote several grants and asked me, like, what would you like to do? And so in that grant, it is to create a podcast with the research that we've done, to have an opportunity to teach other historically Black neighborhoods, to do some training with other folks in the community, to get a designation for the Wesley AME Church in our neighborhood, to have a historical marker designation. What else did we have down there? That, I think it was those 3 things. And so we got this incredible grant, National Humanities Grant. We didn't get the full amount because they were sharing the love with everybody, which was great. So we weren't able to train other historically Black neighborhoods, but we created 5-episode podcasts, making a home place, historically Black neighborhood of Swarthmore. You can go to Philadelphia Folklore Project website. It's right there, and also Apple Music. Just HBNS podcast, or Historically Black Neighborhood of Swarthmore podcast. So yes, those reside there. So all of this work just has to do with, in 200 years, they're going to archives and knowing we existed, and that we won't be washed away without a memory.
I love it. I love it. And there's another aspect of applied folkloristics that I want you to talk about, which you have, because you've mentioned it since we first started our discussion this evening. Dealing with social change and dealing with advocacy. And I know you engage in a lot of advocacy work. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes. I mean, again, it goes back to, for the neighborhood side of it. Oop, heard a squirrel run by on the ceiling. Sorry.
That's okay.
Like, what? They're coming in. On the neighborhood side of it, it's people having their voice, right? Being able to tell your own stories with your own voice. On the dance side of it, even in the like I'd say, looking at the K-12 programming and working with children and working with my college students, it's the agency for folks to have their agency about who you are, how like that matters, like that you in the advocacy, just that everybody really matters. That one person isn't better than the next or more significant than another. That each and us, each and every one of us and who we are fine. So having like just for these young people to know that, now I don't mean like offer something sloppy of what you're going to offer, but whatever you're offering it up with thought, with with some work behind it, with some support behind it, that um knowing you can be supported in your thoughts. That, I don't know. I think that's really it, is just the individual knowing that you can make a difference, like you can make a change. And so you thinking that individually with a bunch of other people thinking that, then we can either feel it like that or feel the full force of it. But there have been things like when I was with young audiences and through the state of New Jersey, I would go out and do school programs and they would have funding for the African dancer, but not for the musician.
Mm.
I'm like, I gotta have my musician. I'm not, I don't, I, the way I do my practice, I'm not going to do it to recorded music. And so with those organizations being able to spend time having these conversations about the significance and what does it mean to sit in a room and make decisions on art forms that you don't have the authority to make a decision on because you don't even understand that drum and dance like djembe, looking at djembe drum and dance, I was that it has to go together. It's a dialogue, right? And it also is who's in the room. Typically, it's going to be a Black man. There are Black women who don't, but it's going to be that, right? Well, nowadays anybody's playing the drums, right? It's open for all of us. But in my case, I'm bringing in the drummers from Philly, and that's who they are. And so it also is who's entering a space, right? So you're not just denying the music, you're denying the students that have an opportunity to interact with this Black man.
Right.
That they don't always have the opportunities at the schools where I'm at to interact with them unless they might be their driver or somebody delivering food or things, in some of the schools. That's just what that is. So advocacy, to just put my foot down and tell them, I just can't be the first person to bring this up, that I refuse to go to these schools and do this work unless you're going to support and have that. Well, it's not in the budget. Well, who creates it? So change like that, we've been able to make change on the state level in New Jersey so that they don't do that anymore. And not just for like my art form, but any art form where you would have live musical accompaniment. Right? Don't take the guitar player from the flamenco dancer, the tabla player from the katak, or the drummer from,
Right.
let
Right.
it be the way it's supposed to be, because it becomes tricky, right? Like
Yes.
when you think that you can deny cultures, what they need, what's required. Um,
Right.
other places in advocacy could even be in choreography, like the specific choreographic pieces that I'll create for students to perform, either having the students have a voice,
Right.
or the times we're living in where I'm making that decision as the choreographer that we need to say something about this. And so the advocacy can come out like almost always through the dance, in that way. So through the neighborhood or oral history, it's telling your story. In dance, also I've documented um uh uh the the African drum and dance community in Philly, along with other people, like collaborated on a project called Ancestors of Rhythm and Change. So
Ooh.
even having that, like having our folks in Philly being able to have their voice and have it recorded. And that was through Folklore Project. And that project ended up at museum, like other places getting curated, not just at the Folklore Project, but the American History Museum, um, teaching tools in the classroom, right?
Right. Because I saw you did work with um local learning,
Yeah.
who I love them.
Yes.
So I have to ask you this because initially I was going to frame it as oral history, but it sounds like folklore as a whole is your act of resistance, revolution, liberation.
Yeah, I guess over time it's changed, right? Like it or maybe it didn't. It just manifested through, drum and dance. It manifested as a storyteller. Then it started manifesting as a oral historian, and then collect, not just telling the stories but collecting those stories. And this is probably helpful for you to say this, because when I apply for grants, I think they can't figure me out. Because I'm this and I do this and I do this, and how, like if I just said I'm a folklorist and here are the things that I do to make it happen. But people keep seeing me as the dancer, and that way, like, you see that, but she's doing these things too, so
I mean, and they're great things. So
right.
let me. So if someone would come say, one of your students, Miss Jeannine, I want to do what you do. What is it? What do you call it? And then how can I go about positioning myself?
For me, what do I call it? I probably use the term arts educator, even at what the college you do more, but um yeah. So what would I ask them to, what would they do to be like me?
If they say so, okay, all right. So arts education, sure. So what is it that I would have to do? Where do I start?
Mm. Huh. Where do you start? I think there are multiple places, like ways that you can start. There isn't any one way. Um, if we're talking dance, it's just getting your body in the spaces and moving. If it's like, at the college, well, then major or minor or double major or minor in this. If it's in the community, I don't do this now, but there was a period of time, probably coming up to the early 2000s, where I was using the model that my teachers had, where you're like doing on the job training. I had another group called Ebeji, and with Ebeji, we did a lot of foundational work, training dancers, community folks, to be actually eventually professional dancers. Some of them grew up and are highly regarded professional dancers. Um, yeah, actually, I had somebody go through a list of all these people we know who I taught, um,
Wow.
or had, like, I was part of their contribution to where they are, now. But we used to use our model of our teachers in terms of weekly classes, in terms of certain readings that you would have to do, attending events, um, uh, the on that job training, like lecture demonstrations, bringing artists in. I still do that. I do it not just with my work, but there's a group in Philadelphia, FICA, which is a Philadelphia capoeira, international capoeira group. They have a few of their artists when they're training as teachers. And so when we go out and do our school programs, we team up with them, and it gives them additional opportunities to do K to 12 programming with Dunya. So, and coming in and doing the work together. Um, for me, I do have several folks who've recently, like, graduated out of Swarthmore, or graduated from Ursinus College, and they are looking of where to get their footing and what to do. And so just giving them advice on companies they could go to work with, looking for me at what are opportunities that I could create, or where I could get some help, right? Like even admin, like bringing them in and help me do the admin, and we'll do the training. So just right now, I'm looking at 2 students that I'm going to work with for that. So if it's art and education, get all your clearances, right? All your clearances that you need, state, government, local, all of that. Um, Finding a teacher that you can stick with, because it isn't about the in and out, but if you're learning it more side by side as an apprentice, then it's a longer period of time, in that process with that particular teacher. Um,
I dig it. That's a
yes.
great answer. So now you've,
Can I say something?
yes, ma'am.
For me, because I didn't get my like college degree in dance, it was through the apprenticeship, right, model with our teachers. um when I was accomplished enough, many years in, and and it was time for me to start to teach, my teachers, our teachers, like, were the ones who said, okay, now it's time for you to start to teach. So in the class with them, that's, some of that would also happen besides outside of the class, for the research and the work. When I wanted to have my first dance group, and I'm here in Pennsylvania, I actually called those teachers to ask for permission, to, like, let them know this is what I'm doing right now. This is what I have been doing, and basically get their blessing to be able to have a company. Because we still were connected. Like, and now at my college, you just get your degree, you've done your 4 years, and you can go out and do it. But if you don't have that way, then you do need, you are doing the one-on-one, or you're in a group, with a full group of people. um, we do need checkpoints and things to make sure when you go out in the world to present it, that the quality, and the information is correct.
Right, which is more traditional
Right,
when you're dealing with folk expressions, right?
right.
Right. So now you've said this in so many ways throughout the entire interview, if you will. But I want to ask you explicitly and straight directly.
Uh-oh.
How significant is not only your work, but the idea of doing this kind of work to and for Black American people?
It changes lives. um are we talking dance? Are we just talking
The
the
overall broader,
I'm not categorizing. Okay.
right,
It changes lives. And it empowers African Americans. Um, in the work that I'm doing, I hope that it also inspired, like, the empowerment is through the inspiration that if I can do this, so can you. You can begin today by just jotting down some of your questions, and we all have our devices, these days, that it's so much easier, to be able to capture those moments and capture those stories, and get them then transcribed, right? Like, then get them written out so you have versions of it. But for African Americans, it lets the world know we're not going anywhere. We have stories. Our stories matter. In spite of even what's happening right now and whatever the climate is out in the world, that by telling your stories, doing the research on your stories, and sitting with other people to get their stories, then you making those breakthroughs and those differences in our generation now. You're correcting wrongs from the past. That's what I mean in being in 3 different places, that you actually can dip back and make corrections of the past in the future, or in the current, here we are, but in the future people can look back to it.
I love it. So, is there anything that you thought I was going to ask you or hope that I asked that I did not?
Oh, I like that question. That's my favorite one. Then people say, no, I have nothing else to say. And then we pause, and then we think. So let's think. Um, if I were to die tomorrow,
Hmm.
Sorry, because I'm full of life, but when I do choreography or work, I can be very morbid. And like giving students, like I said, having students write their last will and testament and then having to dance that so that they can think about like project their life out. But if I were to die tomorrow doing this type of work, knowing that I had a chance to identify as and be a folklorist, that I had a chance to go in the world through movement, through words, through no sound, through sound, through written, through not written, and care about people's lives and why it's significant, why their culture and what they do on an everyday level is significant, then I will rest in peace. I will rest in peace because this work gives me meaning and it gives me value. And when people say, oh, you're somewhere and you're in public, and they like feel sorry that I'm just a dancer, right? Like, I'm with the engineer and I'm with the lawyer and I'm with all these people. And then they like, oh, she's just the dancer. Well, how do
Mhm.
make it? How are you successful? How are you? But, the success isn't just the money. We all need the money. Nobody's trying to say we don't.
Right.
Right. Right. But measuring my earnings for my success isn't it. Measuring the folklore practice and that people, like everybody matters and their stories matter and their lives matter. That's where the wealth is. That's it.
I mean, there's nothing that can follow that statement. You know how to close a show, Miss Jeannine.
Thank you.
Tell the people where to find you.
Oh, yes. Hey, good people out there. What you know good. All right. You can find me at, well, let's just say DunyaPAC.com. And Dunya, Dunya, means the world or the life of the world that we live in. So you can find me at https:// www.DunyaPAC.com/.
I dig it. Thank you so much for your time and for all the work that you're doing. We celebrate you, not just this month, period.
Thank you. It's exciting to be celebrated, and it is an honor for the African American folklorist to shine a spotlight. I appreciate it. My ancestors appreciate it, and thank you.